What was life really like for poor families in 1950s America, behind the smiles and the picket fences? For millions, daily life meant scraping by on rationed food, patched clothes, and dreams that never reached the suburbs. If this was the perfect decade, why did so many quietly struggle just to survive? It was called the American Dream, but for poor families in the 1950s, it often felt like a dream someone else was living. Everywhere you looked, magazines and television shows painted a perfect picture. The cheerful housewife, the clean suburban home, and the shiny new car parked out front. But behind the white picket fences and smiling ads, many families were struggling just to make rent or put food on the table. The myth of the happy suburban family hid an entire generation of Americans who never had the luxury to live like that. The truth was, not everyone could afford the comfort shown on the screen. Many were crammed into small apartments or rundown farmhouses, living paycheck to paycheck. Fathers worked multiple jobs, mothers stretched every dollar, and kids often went without new clothes or toys. There was pride in survival, but shame in poverty, so most people stayed silent about how hard it really was. Still, they found small joys. A radio show after dinner, a walk in the summer air, or a shared meal that somehow felt like a feast. The real 1950s weren't picture perfect. They were worn, weary, and quietly strong. Families built their happiness out of what little they had, even if the rest of the country never saw it that way. The suburbs may have promised paradise, but for millions of working-class Americans, paradise always stayed just out of reach. Government surplus food boxes were the unsung heroes of poor families' kitchens in the 1950s. Before food stamps or modern assistance programs, these boxes kept thousands of households from going hungry. Inside were the same few items: canned meats, powdered milk, peanut butter, flour, and blocks of government cheese so dense they could probably survive a tornado. Families learned to turn these basic, bland supplies into full meals through creativity and sheer necessity. Mothers mixed powdered milk into mashed potatoes or used it to stretch pancake batter a little further. The taste might not have been great, but it kept stomachs full. The boxes weren't just food, they were survival. Each delivery came with both relief and embarrassment, gratitude for help, and a quiet reminder of how little you had. Kids didn't understand the politics behind it, only that there was finally something to eat. These government rations were also a lifeline during winter months, when work slowed and money ran out faster than hope. Housewives shared recipes, turning surplus Spam into Sunday casseroles or cornbread into dessert with a drizzle of syrup. You can almost imagine those kitchens filled with the smell of something cooking, the sound of plates clattering, and the hope that tomorrow might be a little easier. In the end, it wasn't glamorous, but it worked. That plain cardboard box meant another week of meals, another reason to keep going. Dirt floors and tar paper shacks might sound like something from the Great Depression, but for many poor American families in the 1950s, that was still everyday life. In rural areas, especially in the South, people lived in small, weather-beaten homes patched together with whatever materials they could find: scrap wood, cardboard, even flattened tin cans nailed to the walls. Tar paper acted like insulation, but it barely kept out the rain or wind. In the winter, families stuffed rags into cracks to block drafts, and in the summer, the heat turned those homes into ovens. The floors were sometimes just packed earth, swept clean every morning, and sprinkled with water to keep down the dust. It was far from the glossy kitchens and tiled bathrooms shown on television. Yet these homes were filled with life: children playing outside, mothers cooking on old stoves, and fathers fixing leaks or chopping wood. When visitors came by, they were treated with hospitality that money could never buy. There was pride in keeping things tidy, no matter how humble they were. Every nail hammered, every crack covered, was proof of hard work and dignity in the face of struggle. The houses might have been poor, but the spirit inside them wasn't. That's what people held on to, not the walls around them, but the strength to make those walls feel like home. Hand-me-down clothing was more than just tradition for poor families. It was a way of life. When you could not afford new clothes, you learned to make old ones last. Mothers became magicians with a needle and thread, patching knees, darning socks, and taking in hems so that one child's outfit could fit the next. Some families kept the same winter coats for years, passed from sibling to sibling until the buttons barely held. Kids might have felt embarrassed at school, especially when standing next to classmates wearing something new from the department store, but most learned to take pride in what they had. The sound of a sewing machine late at night was as familiar as a lullaby. Pieces of scrap fabric were never thrown away. They became quilts, doll clothes, or new collars for worn shirts. Even shoes were repaired instead of replaced, often with cardboard soles to cover holes. Looking back, it is easy to romanticize that thriftiness, but it came from necessity, not choice. Yet it also built resilience. A patched shirt was not a sign of shame. It was proof of a family's ability to adapt, to make beauty out of struggle. Those old clothes carried more than stitches. They carried stories of survival and love sewn into every seam. Homemade meals from cheap staples were the heart of daily life for poor families in the 1950s. The kitchen was where survival turned into comfort, even if the ingredients were few. Dinners were simple: beans, cornbread, potatoes, and salt pork, cooked slow and served hot. There was nothing fancy about it, but there was pride in making something out of almost nothing. Every scrap was used. Leftover grease became seasoning. Bacon drippings were saved in jars, and cornbread crumbs were turned into breakfast the next morning. The smell of those meals carried through small houses, reminding everyone that at least tonight they would eat. It was hard work, cooking from scratch after long days, rationing food, and praying it would last until payday. Still, families gathered around those chipped tables, laughed, and talked. That was the one place where poverty seemed to fade, if only for a moment. Those meals taught generations the meaning of gratitude. A pot of beans might not look like much, but it fed a whole family and kept them going. There was a deep kind of love in those meals, love measured not by luxury but by effort. When you sit down to eat today, it is worth remembering that the best dishes of the past weren't about recipes. They were about resilience. Tenant farming and sharecropping were still common in parts of America during the 1950s, especially in the South. Families who had no land of their own worked the fields belonging to others, often under unfair agreements that kept them trapped in poverty. They planted, harvested, and sweated through long days. But when payday came, there was little left after debts were counted. The system favored the landowners, not the laborers. Entire families, parents and children, worked together, bending under the sun, their hands rough from soil and cotton. The dream of owning a small piece of land felt nearly impossible. Yet even in those conditions, families held on to hope. They found joy in the small things: a full basket, a cool breeze, or a song shared in the fields. Churches and community gatherings gave them moments of relief from endless labor. Those who lived through it carried a strength that words can barely capture. The sharecropping life wasn't just about poverty. It was about endurance. Each season was a gamble against weather, debt, and exhaustion. But quitting wasn't an option. The land gave them little, but it gave them purpose. They taught their children to work hard, dream bigger, and believe that someday their lives would belong to them again. Coal or wood heating was the lifeline of many poor families in drafty old homes. Central heating was something only the well-off could afford, and for everyone else, warmth came from whatever they could burn. Coal stoves, potbelly heaters, or makeshift wood furnaces filled the corners of small rooms. The smell of smoke lingered in the air, mixing with the scent of dinner cooking on the stove. Families huddled close on cold nights, wrapping themselves in blankets while frost formed on the windows. Keeping the fire going was a daily ritual, shoveling coal before dawn or chopping wood after work. The stoves were temperamental, and accidents were common. Burn marks on the floor and soot on the walls were badges of survival. Still, the heat they gave off felt like safety. When the fire crackled, the home felt alive again. Coal dust blackened hands and faces, but nobody cared. That was warmth you could feel, earned through labor, not luxury. Looking back, it is easy to forget how cold those winters could be and how precious that little bit of heat really was. It wasn't just about staying warm. It was about holding on to comfort in a world that often felt frozen against them. Living without refrigeration or indoor plumbing might sound unimaginable today, but for countless families in the 1950s, it was reality. In many rural areas, electricity hadn't yet reached every home. Instead of refrigerators, people used ice boxes or root cellars, relying on blocks of ice delivered once a week to keep food from spoiling. Water came from hand-pumped wells or nearby streams, and carrying it inside was a daily chore. Bathing meant heating water on the stove and pouring it into a metal tub, one person at a time. There was no such thing as long showers or automatic washing machines. Clothes were scrubbed by hand and hung outside to dry in the wind. It was exhausting work, but it was also the rhythm of life. Everyone had their role, and everyone contributed. The sound of a water pump creaking or the splash of a tin bucket was as familiar as a door closing. It was not glamorous, but it was honest. People appreciated every bit of progress that came their way because they knew what life was like without it. When indoor plumbing finally arrived, it wasn't just convenience, it was liberation. But those who lived before it never forgot what it meant to truly earn comfort. Welfare and relief lines were both a lifeline and a source of shame for struggling families in small-town America. In a decade that glorified self-reliance and success, asking for help felt like failure. Yet thousands had no other choice. Relief offices handed out vouchers, food, or small checks that barely covered rent. Standing in line meant risking the judgmental stares of neighbors or the whispers that followed afterward. Mothers often sent older children instead, hoping to save face. The system wasn't kind. It made people prove their poverty again and again, as if surviving wasn't proof enough. But for those who endured it, relief meant survival. A sack of flour, a few cans, or a winter coat could change a family's week. The irony was that the same communities that looked down on handouts depended on them more than they would admit. Many who worked full-time still couldn't make ends meet. The real shame didn't belong to those standing in line. It belonged to a society that let them struggle in silence. And yet, out of that quiet humiliation, a kind of resilience grew. Families learned to take help with grace and to give it too when their time came. Compassion often starts with hunger. Factory and mill work was the backbone of poor America in the 1950s. The jobs were tough, the hours long, and the pay barely enough to live on, but they kept the country running. Men and women clocked in before sunrise and left after dark, their hands raw from machines and their clothes coated in dust or grease. The noise was constant, metal clanging, belts turning, steam hissing, a symphony of survival. There were no safety standards, no fancy benefits, and no time for rest. But those workers took pride in what they did. They built cars, textiles, furniture, and steel that defined an entire era. Lunch breaks were short but sacred. Coffee from a thermos, sandwiches wrapped in paper, maybe a shared joke to break up the monotony. It was hard labor, but it was honest work. Paydays meant relief, even if the money vanished the moment the bills came due. For many, the factory was both a prison and a promise, the only chance to feed their families and maybe, just maybe, to climb one rung higher. The strength of the nation rested on tired shoulders. Those men and women didn't just build products, they built America's endurance, one shift at a time. Outhouses and outdoor toilets were a fact of life for many poor families in the 1950s, especially in rural America. Even as the rest of the country celebrated shiny new suburbs and modern bathrooms, thousands of households still relied on a small wooden shed out back. It was often nothing more than a seat over a pit, with a moon carved into the door and a cold wind sneaking through the cracks. In the summer, the smell was unbearable. In the winter, the air froze your breath before you could finish your business. There was no glamour, no privacy, and certainly no comfort. But people made do. Lime was sprinkled to keep the odor down, and newspapers or old catalog pages replaced toilet paper. Children learned early to bring a lantern at night and to watch for snakes or spiders hiding under the seat. It was unpleasant, sure, but it was normal. For many, the outhouse symbolized self-reliance, a reminder that life was rough but manageable. When indoor plumbing finally arrived, people didn't just celebrate convenience, they celebrated dignity. But the memory of those walks down the dark path, the crunch of dry grass underfoot, and the creak of that old wooden door never really left them. It was a humble piece of history, built on necessity and endurance, marking the gap between two Americas, one modern, one still hanging onto the past. Mothers taking in laundry or boarders was one of the most common ways women earned money in the 1950s when opportunities for poor families were few. A washboard, a line, and determination were often all they had to work with. You could walk down a street and hear the steady rhythm of scrubbing echoing from one back porch to another. It was hard, back-breaking work, bending, rinsing, wringing, hanging, and folding, all while cooking meals and watching children. The smell of soap and wet cotton filled the house, and by nightfall, every muscle ached. For those lucky enough to have an extra room, taking in boarders offered another way to survive. Sometimes it was a young worker, a traveling salesman, or even a distant cousin who paid a few dollars each week for meals and a bed. It meant less privacy, but it also meant one more bill could be paid. These women were the backbone of their families, stretching small incomes through sheer grit and resourcefulness. They didn't call it entrepreneurship back then, but that's exactly what it was. Every shirt washed and every bed rented out was another day of survival earned by hand. There was no luxury in it, but there was pride. They weren't waiting for help. They made their own way, one load of laundry at a time. Kids working after school was not unusual. It was expected in poor families of the 1950s. Childhood wasn't about toys and television shows, it was about responsibility. After school, you might see boys tossing newspapers from their bicycles or shining shoes downtown, while girls babysat the neighbors' kids or cleaned houses. A few dollars a week meant groceries on the table or coal in the stove. Some worked on farms, helping with harvest or feeding livestock before the sun went down. Homework came after chores, often by lamplight. There was no allowance, no free time, and no complaining. Parents taught their kids early that everyone had to contribute. The lessons were tough but unforgettable. These children grew up fast, learning the value of hard work long before adulthood arrived. There was pride in handing a few crumpled bills to your mother, knowing it would help keep the lights on. It wasn't about ambition. It was about survival. And yet, those long days built character that stayed for life. Many who lived through it later looked back and realized those after-school jobs taught them more than any classroom ever could. It was a childhood shaped by struggle, but also by strength. Payday loans and credit tabs at the corner store were the financial lifelines of working-class families in the 1950s. There weren't credit cards or safety nets, just handwritten notes in the grocer's ledger that said you'd pay later. The owner knew everyone by name and usually knew how tight money was too. "Put it on the tab," people would say, with a mix of hope and worry. Groceries, milk, soap, essentials, not luxuries, all went on credit when the paycheck didn't stretch far enough. But payday always came slower than expected, and interest wasn't just numbers. It was trust, reputation, and pride. Falling behind meant embarrassment, and sometimes the storekeeper stopped extending credit altogether. The system worked on faith, and in small towns, faith mattered more than paperwork. Still, it created a cycle that was hard to escape. Many families spent their lives catching up, paying off one debt only to start another. Yet those tabs kept food on the table. They were proof that survival depended as much on community as on money. People took care of each other, even when they could barely take care of themselves. It wasn't perfect, but it was human. Rural isolation and lack of medical care were some of the hardest parts of poverty in the 1950s. For families far from town, the nearest doctor could be 20 or 30 miles away. Without a car or steady income, that might as well have been another world. When someone got sick, mothers did what they could: home remedies, hot compresses, or prayers whispered in the dark. Children with fevers were cooled with damp cloths, and broken bones were sometimes set at home by guesswork and hope. Hospitals were too far, too expensive, or simply unwilling to treat those without means. Many babies were born at home, delivered by midwives or older women in the community who'd learned from experience rather than formal training. Tragedy was common, but people rarely complained. It was just how life was. When a doctor did make the journey, it was an event. Neighbors gathered, offering rides or meals in thanks. Illness didn't discriminate, but poverty made it far more cruel. Those who survived learned resilience in its rawest form. The isolation built strong hearts but often broke bodies. Still, through it all, communities held together, because when you were that far from help, you became the help. Segregated and underfunded schools were another painful reminder of inequality in the 1950s America. For many poor children, especially Black children in the South, education was a daily struggle against neglect. Classrooms were overcrowded, textbooks were hand-me-downs from white schools, and supplies were scarce. Desks wobbled, roofs leaked, and chalkboards were worn smooth from years of use. Teachers did their best, often working without proper pay or materials, driven only by love for their students. But it was hard to teach hope when the system itself denied it. Children walked miles to school on dirt roads while buses passed them by. Yet inside those small buildings, something remarkable happened. Determination grew. Students studied harder, families sacrificed to buy pencils or notebooks, and communities built pride out of struggle. Education became not just a dream, but a quiet act of resistance. Every lesson learned was a step forward, even if progress came painfully slow. Those schools didn't have resources, but they had heart. They were proof that knowledge can survive even when opportunity does not. Looking back, they remind us that fairness was fought for long before it was given. Public housing projects promised hope, but often delivered heartbreak. In the 1950s, cities across America built towering brick complexes to give poor families a fresh start. At first, they seemed like salvation: clean apartments, running water, and heat. But as years passed, neglect set in. The walls were thin, the elevators broke, and the air was filled with echoes of crying babies and distant arguments. For families who came from crumbling shacks, it was still an improvement, but the price was privacy and peace. Children grew up surrounded by concrete instead of grass, learning early how hard life could be, even with a roof overhead. But the system saw statistics, not people. Still, behind every door was a story of resilience, laughter, and the will to make a home out of hardship. Those families didn't just live in the projects, they survived them. Health hazards from poor housing conditions were silent but deadly for struggling families. The paint that peeled from the walls contained lead. The insulation and ceiling tiles hid asbestos fibers. Families didn't know the risks. They only knew the rent was cheap. Children played on dusty floors, breathing in poison without realizing it. Landlords rarely fixed anything, and tenants couldn't afford to move. Fires, mold, and infestations were all part of daily life. But there was only so much soap and hope could do. The sickness lingered, invisible but relentless. These homes held love, laughter, and life, but they also held danger that no one talked about. Poverty didn't just break wallets, it broke bodies. Hand-pumped wells and washing by hand were daily rituals for many poor families long after modern conveniences became standard elsewhere. Every morning started with the squeak of the pump handle, water splashing into metal buckets. Carrying them inside was heavy, tiring work, repeated over and over through the day. Clothes were scrubbed on washboards until knuckles bled, rinsed in cold water, then wrung out and hung to dry in the sun. Bathing meant sharing the same tub of water, oldest to youngest, because heating more meant using precious fuel. Yet for all the hardship, there was rhythm in the routine. Families gathered around the pump, children playing in the splash while mothers talked over chores. They didn't think of it as deprivation. It was just life. When electric washers and plumbing finally came, it was like stepping into a new world. But the memory of that cold water, those calloused hands, and the smell of clean laundry drying in the wind never faded. Home canning and Victory Garden leftovers were how poor families stretched their food through the seasons. When store shelves were too expensive, the backyard became the pantry. Rows of beans, tomatoes, and cucumbers filled small gardens, tended carefully through long summers. When harvest came, families gathered to preserve every last bit, boiling jars, sealing lids, and lining shelves with the fruits of their labor. The sound of popping jar lids was the music of security. Even children helped, peeling vegetables or washing jars under watchful eyes. Nothing went to waste. Bruised fruit became jam, and scraps went into stews. In towns and farms alike, canning was both tradition and survival skill passed down through generations. When the snow fell and money ran thin, those jars gleamed like treasure. They were proof of foresight and effort, of families who refused to go hungry. In the simplicity of those glass jars lay a powerful truth. Security doesn't always come from wealth, but from work, care, and hope preserved one season at a time. Second-hand furniture was the heartbeat of most poor homes in the 1950s America. Few families could afford brand new items, so living rooms and kitchens became collections of stories told through mismatched chairs, chipped tables, and hand-me-down couches that had already lived a full life elsewhere. Nothing matched, but everything mattered. Families didn't throw things away. They fixed them. A little glue, a hammer, and some paint could make something new enough. Saturday mornings were often spent at yard sales or second-hand stores, searching for pieces that still had life left in them. A rocking chair with a broken leg might become a stool. An old cabinet could turn into a bookshelf. Every piece had a purpose. Homes were humble, yes, but they were alive with effort and love. Each creaking chair or wobbly table was proof that beauty didn't come from price tags, but from persistence. When guests arrived, no one cared that the furniture didn't match. What mattered was that there was always a seat for them, always room for company, no matter how small the space. The local church was far more than a building. It was the heart of the community and the safety net for poor families in the 1950s. When money ran short or food ran out, the church was often the only place that could help. Sunday mornings weren't just for worship, they were for connection. People came together to share burdens, exchange news, and offer quiet support that stretched far beyond religion. Churches organized clothing drives, handed out food baskets, and collected small donations for families in need. Children learned not only hymns, but also the value of kindness and giving. Pastors visited the sick and comforted the grieving, often arriving at doorsteps before doctors or government aid ever could. Even those who weren't regular attendees turned to the church when the world outside felt cold and indifferent. In small towns especially, the church bell was the sound of hope. Whether through prayer, food, or a simple hug, the church carried families through hard seasons. It didn't matter if the pews were old or the roof leaked. Inside those walls, people found warmth the world often forgot to give. Charity Christmases were bittersweet for poor families in the 1950s. For many, the holiday joy came not from gifts under the tree, but from donations and church programs like the Angel Tree. Families filled out lists of their children's needs, not wants, and hoped for generosity from strangers. Yet behind the smiles, there was always a trace of embarrassment. Churches and charities worked hard to bring dignity to the season. Volunteers wrapped presents in colorful paper and added a handwritten tag from Santa so kids could keep believing in the magic. Community halls glowed with the laughter of children opening simple toys, their eyes lighting up in ways that made every volunteer tear up. Some families even gave back in their own ways, baking cookies for the church or helping pack boxes for others the following year. Those Christmases taught powerful lessons: that generosity mattered, that kindness was contagious, and that pride had to bend for love to survive. The season wasn't about abundance, it was about togetherness. A single donated toy could fill a home with happiness because it meant someone out there cared. That's what Christmas meant for families who had little, not luxury, but love that refused to fade, even in the hardest years. Black and white televisions were more than entertainment in the 1950s. They were windows into another world. For poor families, even a second-hand set was a luxury, bought on layaway or inherited from someone upgrading to something better. The flicker of moving pictures brought life into small, dimly lit rooms. Neighborhoods sometimes shared one television, and kids crowded around it, sitting cross-legged on the floor, eyes wide with wonder. Static crackled. Antennas needed adjusting, and sometimes the picture rolled endlessly, but no one cared. It was magic, a slice of escape from hard days. Fathers tinkered with the set like mechanics, proud when they got it working again. Evenings became events, with families gathering to watch favorite shows before bed. Laughter from sitcoms mixed with the real laughter of families who finally had something to enjoy together. It made them feel part of a modern world, even if their home was old and worn. That glowing screen was proof that joy could still reach them, even through static. Homemade toys and imagination games defined childhood for poor families long before store-bought plastic-filled toy aisles. Kids in the 1950s knew how to turn anything into fun. A stick became a sword, a cardboard box became a spaceship, and bottle caps became soldiers in an epic backyard war. Mothers sewed dolls out of scrap fabric or stuffed socks with rags, while fathers carved wooden cars from leftover boards. Toys weren't just playthings. They were acts of love, made by hand and built to last. When the day's work was done, children invented entire worlds outside, playing hide-and-seek until the sun disappeared. Games like marbles, hopscotch, and jump rope needed only chalk or a ball, but they created memories that lasted a lifetime. Even chores turned into play, racing to finish before siblings or pretending to be grown-ups while helping their parents. These games taught creativity, teamwork, and resilience. They gave children a sense of freedom, even when their families were struggling. Looking back, those simple toys and unplanned adventures meant everything. They proved that joy doesn't depend on money, and imagination can turn scarcity into magic. Heating only one room in winter was not just a strategy, it was survival. The whole house might be freezing, but one space stayed warm. Maybe it was the living room with a kerosene heater. Maybe the kitchen with the oven door cracked open. You brought in extra blankets. You wore your coat indoors. Everyone piled in, like penguins sharing body heat. You did homework at the coffee table, ate soup from mismatched bowls, slept on the couch or a pile of comforters laid out on the floor. The hallway felt like Antarctica. The bathroom? A short, icy sprint. At night, the cold crept into your bones, but during the day, you all huddled in that one room like it was the center of the universe. Parents told kids to keep the door shut. Do not let the heat out. No one dared argue. It was about bills, about making it to spring. And even though it felt unfair at the time, it also brought people close. Literally, you learned to share space, to pass the time, to be warm in more ways than one. Heating one room was not ideal, but it was home, and somehow it got you through. Blank VHS tapes were not just empty plastic boxes. They were treasure chests, the kind you could label, relabel, and fill up with your own little corner of television history. You remember the sound, right? That whirring click as the VCR accepted your latest recording project, whether it was The Muppet Show, a Disney movie airing on Saturday night, or just some random commercials you ended up watching later like they were rare artifacts. Back then, taping something off television was serious business. You had to time it perfectly. Hit record at just the right moment, or risk catching the tail end of a news anchor saying, "And now," before your show started. Fast-forwarding past commercials felt like a power move. Rewinding? An art form. And if you had one of those little tape rewinder machines shaped like a car, you were basically living in luxury. You wrote on those little white stickers with a level of care that rivaled school projects. Do not tape over. Disney only. Toys R Us ad. Keep forever. And when someone in the house recorded over your stuff with a football game, that was war. But if you wanted to really test your patience and your brain power, there was only one screen-based challenge that ruled them all. It looked like a cabinet, just a little rectangle in the wall with a tiny knob. But open it up and suddenly you had an ironing board swinging down like a Murphy bed for your clothes. Fold-out ironing boards in the wall were the peak of space-saving genius. These things were especially popular in mid-century homes, when every inch of space had to count. The board folded out flat, usually right next to the laundry area or inside the kitchen pantry. You did not have to drag a heavy metal contraption from the closet. Just pop it open, plug in the iron, and get to work. Some even had a tiny shelf or built-in plug to hold the iron itself, along with a little light above the board. Now that was fancy. Housewives adored these because they made chores quicker. And let's face it, they just looked slick. Like the house was in on the secret with you. Eventually, though, as trends moved toward larger laundry rooms and portable everything, these ironing stations disappeared. But for the folks who grew up with one, there is a real nostalgia there. It was like opening a secret door into domestic life. Now, speaking of secret doors, the next one was not about cleaning your shirt. It was about making sure your closet smelled like the forest. Before Nintendo, video games were gasping for breath. After Nintendo, they were alive again. It was 1985 when the Nintendo Entertainment System hit American shelves and changed living rooms forever. The gray and red console was a Trojan horse, simple in design but hiding worlds inside. Suddenly, you were not just a kid. You were Mario, leaping through pipes to save the princess. You were Link, braving dungeons for the Triforce. You were part of something massive. Nintendo did not just bring games, it brought heroes. It brought soundtracks you could hum in your sleep and cheat codes whispered like secret spells. The controller became an extension of your hand. Blowing into cartridges felt like a ritual, and beating a level felt like beating life itself. For many, Nintendo was not a toy. It was a friend, a daily escape, a safe place to fail and try again. Families gathered around the screen, arguing over whose turn it was. Siblings became rivals, parents got curious, and the living room was never the same again. With every beep and pixel, Nintendo gave us wonder, and it never asked for anything more than time and imagination. Stirrup pants were the 1980s attempt to combine fashion with function, and they did neither particularly well. These leggings had a strap that looped under your foot, supposedly to keep them from riding up. In reality, they pulled awkwardly at your ankles, made your feet sweat, and caused socks to bunch in weird places. But we wore them anyway. They came in bright colors, bold patterns, and every synthetic material known to mankind. They were stretchy, shiny, and often paired with oversized sweaters or blazers that made no logical sense. From the knees up, you looked like a school principal. From the knees down, you looked like a gymnast caught mid-warm-up. But stirrup pants had their moment. They were the go-to outfit for school picture day, mall trips, or just feeling like you belonged in a fashion catalog. The loop under the foot made you feel oddly secure, like your pants were holding onto you. Sure, they sagged in weird places. Sure, they made your calves look like sausages. But they were a staple, loved, mocked, and deeply missed. For anyone who wore them, stirrup pants were more than a fashion choice. They were a commitment, a stretch of spandex, and a rite of passage. Reliance on government assistance programs was not a choice. It was the only way to get by. Food stamps came in paper booklets, torn out in the checkout line with quiet hands and sideways glances. School lunches were free, but they came with their own kind of price. Standing in a separate line, hearing the whispers, seeing the looks. You carried a different card, a different meal, a different kind of burden. The people behind the counter never said anything. But you knew. Everyone knew. At home, government cheese filled the fridge. Powdered milk sat on the shelf. The pantry was stocked with cans stamped from surplus stores, beans, peanut butter, cereal that tasted like cardboard but kept you full. Your parents made it stretch. They made it work. And they told you to hold your head up even when you wished you could vanish. Because pride does not feed a family. Assistance was not shameful. It was survival. It was how your shoes fit, how your stomach was full, how you still made it to class with something in your bag. And though some days it felt heavy, it also meant someone, somewhere, knew you were worth helping. Even when the world made you forget. Making a mixtape in the 1980s was not just about the music, it was about what the music meant. This was not a playlist you could throw together in 5 minutes. This was a curated collection of feelings, carefully selected for maximum emotional impact. Every track had a purpose. Every order was intentional. You did not just make mixtapes for yourself. You made them for friends, for crushes, for breakups, for birthdays, for sitting in your room, staring at the ceiling, thinking deep thoughts you had no business thinking at that age. You would spend hours hitting pause and record, rewinding to check the transition, trying to fit exactly the right number of songs on each side without cutting one off too soon. There was a science to it, a rhythm, a philosophy, and then came the cover art. Doodles, stickers, fake band logos, scribbled lyrics, little hearts and broken hearts. The label on a mixtape said everything about who you were or who you wanted to be. These tapes were gifts, time capsules, emotional resumes. You gave one to someone and it meant something. It meant a lot. But if you did not have the patience or just wanted to cheat the system a little, you could always get a dozen albums for the price of a gumball. Almost. Back in the days when phones had cords and privacy was a privilege, every hallway had a throne, and it was called the gossip bench. This was not just a chair. It was a hybrid masterpiece, a small wooden seat attached to a side table, designed specifically for long, dramatic phone calls. These benches were often placed right by the hallway phone nook, and if you were a teenager in the 1960s or 1970s, this was your favorite spot in the house. You would sit there for hours, twirling the phone cord, whispering about crushes, repeating, "No, you hang up," while your siblings paced in the background waiting for their turn. Some benches had a little drawer for pens and paper. Others had cushions and floral fabric, showing just how serious folks were about comfort during those marathon chats. It was furniture that served one purpose: conversation. But as phones got smaller, and then wireless, and then fit in your pocket, the gossip bench faded away. Today, they are vintage novelties. Back then, they were the nerve center of the household. And while you chatted away about school dances or new neighbors, something else might have been happening overhead. Quietly, from the ceiling, playing your favorite song. Imagine this. It is Sunday morning. You are eating breakfast, and faintly from above your head comes the sweet hum of big band music or the evening news. If the 80s had a personality, it was neon, loud, proud, and impossible to ignore. Color was not just a trend, it was a statement, and no one whispered. Leg warmers in hot pink, tracksuits in electric blue, eyeshadow that could stop traffic. The entire decade looked like it had been dipped in a highlighter and blasted with a disco ball. It was not about subtlety. It was about standing out. Walk into any mall, any gym, any music video, and it was a rainbow riot. But this was not chaos. It was confidence. Kids wore neon shoelaces. Adults rocked neon windbreakers. Even toys and commercials buzzed with that wild fluorescent glow. It was the decade where fashion turned into rebellion through brightness, because after the muted earth tones of the 70s, the 80s decided to scream. And we listened. We wore color like armor. We matched green earrings to orange belts without blinking. Fashion became a kind of freedom, to be seen, to be remembered, to be unapologetically alive. And yeah, sometimes it was ridiculous. But it was fun. It was electric. And most of all, it was a sign of the times, a wild, glowing, unforgettable beacon of 80s spirit. Waterbeds promised the future and delivered waves of regret. On paper, they were perfect, a heated mattress that cradled your body like a floating dream. But in practice, not so much. Every turn sent ripples across the surface. You tried to roll over, and the whole bed sloshed like a bathtub during an earthquake. Getting in without making a tidal wave was a skill. Getting out without sliding to the floor was an Olympic event. They were heavy, hard to move, and leaked at the worst times, usually at 3 in the morning, soaking everything from socks to shag carpet. Still, They were trendy. If someone had a waterbed, it meant they were either incredibly cool or easily convinced by an in-store demo. Some people swore by them. Others swore at them. Pets hated them. Kids loved jumping on them until they learned that waterbeds and sharp objects do not mix. But for a brief, glorious window in the 1980s, having a waterbed meant you had arrived. It was furniture and flex all in one. Looking back, they were impractical, ridiculous, and unforgettable. And somewhere, in a dusty corner of a basement, one is still gently sloshing, waiting for its comeback. DIY haircuts at home were a gamble wrapped in a towel and held together by hope. The kitchen turned into a salon. A dining chair became the barber's throne. Mom or dad grabbed the dullest scissors in the drawer and told you to sit still. You did. Kind of. And snip by snip, your identity changed. Bangs went crooked. Sideburns vanished. One side always ended up shorter. They tilted your head like that would help. You watched the clumps fall, hoping for the best. Sometimes it ended in tears, sometimes in laughs, but most often in silence and a baseball cap. You went to school the next day pretending nothing happened, but everyone knew. They always knew. DIY haircuts were not about style. They were about saving $20 and making it stretch. Hair grew back, groceries did not. So you endured the bowl cuts, the buzz jobs, the too short layers that stuck out like antennas. You got used to it. And after a while, it became normal. A family ritual, a budget tradition. Looking back, those crooked cuts carried more than just uneven lines. They carried effort, sacrifice, and a strange kind of love that you only see when the hair starts to grow in. Before Fandango or streaming apps told us what was playing, there was the operator. And calling the theater was an event in itself. You would dial a number, usually a long one, and wait as a robotic voice or sometimes an actual person listed off every movie in Showtime like it was the State of the Union. Showtimes for the weekend of July 24th, Gremlins at 7:30, The Goonies at 9:15, Ghostbusters at 10:45. You could not skip ahead. You had to listen. Carefully, and maybe even write it down if you were planning a big night. If someone in the house picked up the phone while you were listening, forget it. You had to start over. And if you called during a busy hour, good luck hearing anything over the static and background noise. But it was still exciting. The build-up, the anticipation. You felt like you were about to join something important, something bigger than yourself. Because back then, watching a movie meant going somewhere. It meant tickets, seats, sticky floors, and that one kid who always threw popcorn. It meant magic. But if you wanted movie magic at home, you did not need a theater. You just needed to clear your schedule, grab the good blanket, and stake your claim on the couch. Once upon a time, you did not just decorate your bathroom, you committed to it. We are talking full-color, floor-to-ceiling, single-shade devotion. Pastel pink, mint green, baby blue, or the ever-famous avocado. These were the color-coordinated bathroom suites of the 1950s through the 1970s. And when we say coordinated, we mean everything. The toilet, the tub, the sink, the tile, sometimes even the toilet paper, matched like a showroom display. First Lady Mamie Eisenhower helped popularize the trend with what people dubbed Mamie Pink. Entire homes were built with these candy-colored palettes baked into their bones. But of course, color trends change. What once looked stylish and luxurious now feels a bit like stepping into a cartoon. As minimalism took hold in the 1990s and 2000s, bold bathroom hues were slowly wiped away, replaced by whites, grays, and beige. Still, those vivid bathroom suites had a kind of joy to them. They made you feel something, even if that something was confusion. And if the color did not impress you, the next home feature definitely would, especially if you ever hated carrying a heavy laundry basket down the stairs. Diet Coke did not just arrive, it announced itself. It was 1982, and suddenly there it was, sleek, silver, and somehow cooler than everything else in your fridge. This was not just soda. It was soda with an attitude. People were becoming health conscious, and Coca-Cola knew it. They gave the world an alternative, and we grabbed it with both hands. The can itself looked futuristic. The taste was crisp, sharp, slightly rebellious. You could have your cake and drink it too. Diet Coke became the drink of choice for the fashion-forward, the calorie-conscious, and anyone trying to look good in a shoulder-padded suit. It was everywhere, at malls, in offices, on TV sets next to glowing VCRs. Celebrities held it like an accessory. Models posed with it like it was perfume. It was light. It was fizzy. And it meant something. It meant you were modern. It meant you cared about your image. It meant you could still enjoy life without the guilt. It was not just a beverage. It was a movement, a cool, carbonated promise that you could be smarter, sleeker, and savvier than the people drinking the red can. And in the 80s, that mattered. A lot. Television antenna adjustments were part of the evening routine, just like brushing your teeth or fighting over the remote. Before streaming, before digital signals, there were rabbit ears, two shiny rods that stood on top of the television like alien feelers. Getting a clear picture meant twisting them in random directions, adjusting one while the other stayed stubbornly out of reach. Sometimes you needed to stand on one foot. Sometimes the only way to get the signal was to hold the antenna yourself and stay there, frozen, arm extended, human satellite. Someone from the couch would yell, "Right there, do not move," and you would stay stuck in position, sacrificing comfort for clarity. Foil was added for better reception. Coat hangers became tools of innovation. And if the weather was bad, good luck. The static would return like an uninvited guest. It was frustrating, yes, but it was also communal. Families worked together to solve the mystery of the fuzzy screen. You cheered when the picture came in. You groaned when it disappeared mid-show. Antenna adjustments were the dance of analog television. Awkward, unpredictable, and always a little magical when they actually worked. Limited or no air conditioning meant summer nights were a battle with the heat. The box fan sat in the window, humming like a tired engine, barely moving the thick air. You sweated through your sheets, drank warm water, slept with the lights off and the windows wide open, hoping for a breeze that never came. Some homes had one window unit, and it stayed in the living room. Everyone gathered there like refugees from the sun. No one moved. The couch was soaked in humidity. Tempers flared, ice trays emptied fast. You wore as little as possible, stuck your head in the fridge, and counted the hours until dark. At school, kids talked about central air. You could not imagine it. The idea of a whole house being cool felt like science fiction. You made popsicles out of juice in ice cube trays. You wrapped wet washcloths around your neck. You laid on the floor, hoping the tile was cooler than the bed. And through it all, you survived. Uncomfortable, sticky, and half asleep, but alive. No air conditioning was not ideal, but it made you tough, and it taught you how to endure heat, not just in your house, but in life. Saturday morning cartoons were not just shows. They were rituals. You would wake up at 6 or 7, bowl of cereal in hand, and stake out your spot in front of the television before anyone else in the house even stirred. Pajamas still on, eyes still half shut. But you were ready. The networks fought hard for your attention. ABC, NBC, CBS, they all rolled out animated powerhouses like The Smurfs, He-Man, The Real Ghostbusters, Gem, G.I. Joe, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Each show had its slot, and missing one felt like missing a holiday. But for every golden episode came the heartbreak of your favorite show being bumped, or worse, replaced. The dreaded special news report could interrupt your flow like a slap to the face. You would sit there in disbelief as your cartoon got pulled for a political debate or weather update. No warnings, no mercy. Still, the lineup gave you something to look forward to all week, and for those few hours, everything felt right in the world. Cartoons, cereal, and commercials that somehow got stuck in your head forever. Because let's be honest, there are still jingles from that era that we can sing from memory, word for word. Saturday mornings were sacred. You rolled out of bed in your pajamas, poured a sugary mountain of cereal, and turned on the television like it was a portal to another world. And what greeted you? Magic. Pure animated magic. Shows like He-Man, Transformers, DuckTales, and the Smurfs made those few hours feel like a festival of joy. These were not just cartoons, they were lifelines. The stories were bold, the heroes fearless, and the villains just scary enough to make victory feel earned. You learned about justice from turtles in bandanas, loyalty from robotic cars, and friendship from ponies with glittering eyes. Commercial breaks were an art form. The toys matched the shows, and the shows matched your dreams. This was marketing fused with myth-making, and we loved every second. Your parents saw it as noise, but you knew better. It was a weekly escape from school, chores, and whatever sadness the week might have brought. Those mornings felt endless, like time itself was bending in your favor. The television glowed with color and hope. And as the final credits rolled and the sun climbed higher, you held on to those last cartoon moments like a secret handshake only kids understood. Trapper Keepers were not just school supplies, they were status symbols. With their Velcro flaps and glossy, over-the-top covers, they turned every classroom into a silent competition of who had the coolest binder. Some featured racing cars. Others showed rainbows, unicorns, or abstract laser patterns straight out of a sci-fi fever dream. Inside, everything was neatly organized. Folders, dividers, loose-leaf paper, and secret notes passed during math class. The Velcro made a loud rip every time you opened it, an announcement that learning was about to begin, or at least be attempted. Trapper Keepers made you feel like you had your life together, even if your grades said otherwise. Teachers had a love-hate relationship with them. They were bulky, distracting, but undeniably effective at keeping your stuff in one place. And if you had one with a matching pencil case, you were royalty. Years later, people still remember the smell of the plastic, the feel of flipping through those laminated folders, and the thrill of sliding in a new pack of notebook paper. Trapper Keepers were not just for school, they were for showing off, staying organized, and feeling like you had a little piece of the future in your backpack. Furniture from thrift stores or curbside finds gave homes that mismatched charm only necessity could create. A sagging couch from someone else's garage sale, a wobbly coffee table rescued from the sidewalk, chairs with mismatched legs or beds with slats that creaked under every turn. This was what made a living room feel lived in. There was no delivery truck, just a neighbor with a pickup, or a slow push down the block with a dolly borrowed from Uncle Joe. You sprayed it down, you wiped it twice, and you made it yours. Some pieces were covered in throws to hide the rips. Others leaned against the wall to stay upright. But they had character, stories, a past you never asked about. In kitchens, the table might have a burn mark or a dent from years of use, but it still held dinner. In bedrooms, dressers groaned when you pulled the drawers, but they closed eventually. New furniture was for people with money. For everyone else, you took what you could get, and you were thankful for it. Because when money was tight, having something, anything, to sit on was a win. You did not care how it looked. You cared that it worked. Made-for-television movies in the 1980s were not just filler. They were events. Whole nights were planned around them. When that promo would come on, this Sunday, only on ABC, you would perk up, lean in, and make mental notes to not miss it. This was before DVR, before pause buttons. You missed it? You missed it. These movies had titles like The Day After, V, The Final Battle, or The Ewok Adventure. Some were tearjerkers, some were thrillers, some were straight-up terrifying, and they had you glued to the screen, wondering how they managed to squeeze so much drama into 2 hours. Plus, commercials. Families would make popcorn, dim the lights, and treat it like it was an actual premiere. You watched it live together, and you talked about it the next day at school, because chances were everyone saw it too. They hit different. The music, the narration, even that grainy picture, it all added to the mood. You were not just watching, you were part of something. And right in the middle of those movies came the strange intermissions, ones that could go from innocent to haunting in 5 seconds flat. Walk into an old house and open a closet door, and you might get hit with a smell that is oddly comforting, Woody, warm, a little spicy. That would be cedar, not a scent diffuser, not a spray. Actual cedar wood, lined across the walls of the closet from top to bottom. These cedar-lined closets were the silent guardians of America's wardrobes. They protected against moths, mildew, and musty smells. But they also added a kind of rustic luxury, like storing your clothes inside a tree trunk at a high-end cabin. The idea was simple. Cedar wood naturally repels insects, so why not turn your entire closet into a bug-proof haven? People did not just store coats in there, they kept heirlooms, wool suits, and seasonal clothes safe year-round. Some closets were fully lined, others just had a single cedar panel on one wall. Either way, it gave the whole room a spa vibe long before that was a thing. These days, you might see cedar blocks or hangers sold in stores, but entire closets made of the stuff? That has faded into the woodwork, literally. The world got synthetic, and the cedar charm became a relic. But if you think that was clever, wait until you see how people used to pass food across rooms without ever leaving their chair. If this glimpse into real 1950s life moved you, share your thoughts below, give the video a like to keep these forgotten stories alive, and subscribe so you never miss another journey into the past.